Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Phantom of Darkness's Haunted Ghost Stories. Now, before I begin this series again, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all you subscribers who have recently subscribed and have been there for the beginning of time. We reached a plateau of 500 plus, and I couldn't have done it without you guys. And in a quick note here before we begin entirely, I just wanted to mention that I will be a little bit busier than usual because I'm taking full-time classes, and it kind of sucks because I kind of am forced into the situation where they won't pay my tuition unless it's, full-time, credit. So if I attend this university, I can go in for free if it's full-time because they're offering me a scholarship and whatnot. But for whatever stupid reason, if I only take one class, they have to charge me. So it is what it is. I can't complain because, free is free. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But just to let you guys know, the videos are still coming. I'm going to be really busy, so I'll fit them in as much as possible. But, I'm not making any promises in terms of like everyday uploads because I don't know if that's conceivable. I want to make sure I make quality videos that you guys will enjoy, and I really want to make sure that I get a good recording in. So unfortunately, I'm so sorry for that, but like when the semester ends, I'll try to kick it into high gear and try to provide you guys with the best content, hopefully on a daily basis or every other day, or consistently enough so that there's plenty of material. I do have like 80 plus videos as we speak. But without further ado, here comes the ghost stories once again, and hope you enjoy this one. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's do this. It was about a month before my papa passed away, and I was staying with my aunt and uncle throughout the week, so I could go to my junior high school, and so that my mama could go and stay with my papa while he was in the hospital. I would stay with her on the weekends. Anyway, I stayed in my older cousin's room while he was away in college. I really didn't make this my room my own because I never knew how long I was going to be staying. My papa was seriously ill with cirrhosis of the liver and emphysema and stayed in and out of the hospital. Well, this particular week, he was back in the hospital. It was Sunday night and I went to bed around 9 p.m. My aunt, uncle, and my other cousin was all in bed by 10. I always locked my door before I went to bed for some reason. I turned out the lights and fell right to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I was awakened by the feeling that I was not alone in my bedroom. I laid there a couple of minutes with my eyes closed, attempting to feel whatever or whoever was in my room. I didn't make a sound. I rolled over to my left and opened up my eye. What I saw startled me, but didn't scare me. There was this small figure, about 3 feet, standing next to my bed. It looked like what a cherub would look like, but it was entirely black. Its skin looked like used motor oil, and it was smiling at me. This thing looked just like Uncle Remus's tar baby from the old Disney movie. It just stood there with that creepy smile. It didn't say a word and didn't move a muscle. I took a deep breath and put the sheet over my head and wanted God to take this thing away. I sat there for a minute and peeked out. I caught it as it made a break for my door. The door swung open and it disappeared out of it. The door closed, almost latching. I still wasn't scared out of my mind. I was just wondering how that thing opened my door, even though it was locked, and got out. More importantly, I was wondering what the hell that thing was. When it was time to get up for breakfast, I asked my aunt, uncle, and my other cousin if they were in my room playing a trick on me. They all said they were asleep and didn't know what happened. I still don't know what that thing was. My uncle had built their house around the area where American Indians once lived because they found pottery and arrowheads that would appear in the backyard after a rain. Could this entity be a spirit of a long-lost American Indian? Could it be one of their protective spirits? I will never know what that thing was. Thank you for reading. Ghost? I still remember this as if it happened yesterday. When I was 4 years old, I lived with my grandparents, and they eventually adopted me. My grandparents and I always went to garage sales every Saturday morning, without fail. It was about 6:30 a.m., and my grandpa was out getting gas for the new car, and my grandma was in her bedroom putting on her clothes. I was sitting on the couch eating a bowl of Rice Krispies and watching cartoon. My grandparents had bought a brand new TV with remote and had cable. This was 1980. There was no one in the living room with me at all. I thought I was grown up to get to be alone in the living room. As soon as I thought that, the TV went all weird. My cartoon bleeped off and I became very angry. I went over and hit the TV a couple of times and it came back on. As soon as I sat down with my cereal, the cartoon bleeped off again. I get up and went over to the front of the TV. The screen began to blink and all of these faces began appearing on the screen. I screamed and my grandma came running in her slip. I told her what happened and she thought maybe the cable wire came out of the back. She inspected the back of the TV and found that the wire was secured in place. She hit the top of the TV and cartoon didn't come back. Instead, on the screen there were faces that looked so weird. My channel had not been changed, and there was nothing to explain why these faces were appearing. My grandma could hear whisperings and she turned up the volume. The volume went up, but the voices still remained inaudible and at the same time whispery as before. She was getting a little upset. She had the idea of pulling the plug out of the wall to see if that would fix the TV. She pulled it, and the TV stayed on for about 5 to 6 seconds and then went off. The TVs always went off immediately after pushing the off button. She screamed, and I was crying by this point. She took me by the hand and we ran outside in the backyard and sat on her swing until my grandma came home a few minutes later. She screamed and I was crying by this point. She took me by the hand and we ran outside in the backyard and sat on her swing until my grandpa came home a few minutes later. He saw us and got angry with my grandma for being outside in her slip and for me being out in my gown. She was scared and shaking and told him what had just happened and that she would not go back in the house until that TV was taken out. He was upset by this because he bought that TV the previous week. So he took the TV out of the house and waited until a TV repairman opened up his shop. The repairman took apart the TV and tested the tube and whatever else they do to TVs. He could not explain why the TV went on the fritz like it did. Nevertheless, the TV was returned to the furniture store and we got a new one. That TV never acted strange even. After the TV incident, we started experiencing acute paranormal things that always happened when I and my grandma were alone in the house together. This story is absolutely true. And until I grew up and had my own children, I never told anyone this story. My grandma never told a soul, and as far as I know, she took it with her to the grave. Short and squatty like an old frogman. When I was married to my now ex-husband, we wanted to buy a house. We had 2 small children and needed the room. We found a double wide that was only a few years old and in pristine shape. I wasn't too keen on it, but my ex loved it. When I stepped inside of the house, the atmosphere in it was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. From previous experiences, I knew this was an omen. I told him there was something wrong with it and that we should move on to look at something else. As usual, he never listened to me. We moved in, and things seemed quiet for a while. I went to work and my stepdad came to watch the kids in the morning. The second week of watching the kids, he started getting anxious to leave as soon as my ex or me came home from work. I noticed this and told him we needed to talk. I asked him why he was nearly running out of the door, and he told me that every morning around 9, he heard the back door open and heard footsteps walking through the den, through the kitchen, and stopped in the living room where he was. He also told me that he heard voices throughout the house when there should have been none, other than his and my children. I don't know what to say. He confirmed my suspicions that something wasn't right there, and I didn't want to lose him as a sitter. I told him I would talk to my husband and came up with a plan. Well, the following weekend, things turned for the worse. My car broke down right down at the end of the road from where the house was. My husband was behind the wheel when he said it just stopped driving. It was about midnight and we lived on a country road. Right above where the car stalled, There was a very old AME church that had been abandoned for years. He said that he got out of the car and had the feeling as if someone were behind him. He started running, and it was running after him. He nearly broke down the door, sobbing and shaking, and wouldn't speak of what he saw for a few hours. That Sunday night, he went into work third shift, and I was alone in the house with the kids. My son, who was 4 at the time, kept telling me about this thing he saw in his room at night. He said that it was dressed in a black suit and made him feel very scared. So I assured him that there was no one in the house but us, and tucked him in and my 2-year-old in their beds and went to bed myself. Around 1 a.m., I heard a voice coming out of the boys' room. I thought one of them got out of bed and was coming to get in mine. This mildly irritated me because I knew I would get kicked and pummeled all night. I lay in bed with my back turned to the door. I heard little footsteps walking through the living room. I heard my door open just a bit, with my eyes closed and my back turned to the door. I said, "Come on, Nick, get in the bed with Mama." I waited. No kid. I turned to look and there was no child in my room. I looked all over for them. I finally went to their room, where they were both sound asleep. It struck me kind of odd, and I brushed it off. Things were quiet for a few months after that. I noticed my husband was starting to get into nasty fights almost nightly. He started drinking more and started becoming abusive towards me. We had never had an argument in our whole relationship until we moved into that house. There was one night after a particular nasty fight that the kids told me something strange. After my husband stormed out of the door and went on to work, I went in and made sure the kids were all right. Thankfully, they were asleep. I went to bed upset and was ready to leave with my children to go and stay with my mom until the whole thing blew over. I fell asleep and didn't wake up until the next morning. When I woke up, both kids were in my bed, crying hysterically. I calmed them down and asked them what was wrong. My oldest son said that he and his brother woke up really scared and wanted to get in the bed with me. They saw the man wearing black standing by the front door, and every time they tried to get into my room, it would come over there and threaten to hurt them and me. My son said he was short and squatty like an old frog. They made a run for my room and hopped up on my bed trying to wake me up. They couldn't wake me up and thought I was dead. When I finally woke up, they started crying. They knew Mama was okay and they could go back to sleep. That night, things got out of control. My ex was unbelievably drunk and we had a physical fight in front of the kids. He pushed me down and tried to strangle me. I could see in his eyes that my husband was no longer there, that something else was. I fought for my life and managed to call the cops. The kids and I got out of the house for good. When I went to get our things, my ex had taken nearly everything that belonged to the kids and me. I got whatever was left. When I was in the house, I felt more scared than I ever did in my whole life at that time. Something chased me out of that house, and I never came back. My oldest son is almost 11 years old and still cries to this day. When he mentioned the White House or the Frogman, I will always believe that it was the land and not the house that was haunted. Little Blue-Eyed Boy. From as far back as I can remember, I've had paranormal experiences. I always realized at an early age that most of the time, keeping those experiences to myself was the best way to go. When I was just 4 years old, I relayed one of those experiences to my grandma. She was immediately offended and stated that I needed God and that I was pure evil. So for the most part, while I was growing up, I ignored it, shut it out, or pretend these things didn't even happen to me. Sharing my stories is never easy. It takes a lot out of me. My hands sweat and my insides shake. not because I'm worried no one will believe me or that I will be judged, but because I know voicing these things make them stronger. My first story is about a little blue-eyed boy. In October of 2016, it will be 20 years since I was last visited by this child. The day started out as any other weekday. I woke up early, woke my 4 kids up, fixed them breakfast, and sent them to school. Usually my husband works nights, but this week he was on days. I was super excited to have the house to myself, to just be alone for once. We had moved into the house less than a month before, so I had been working myself nearly to death trying to get these things organized. I was more than ready for a me day. I quickly straightened up the house, making beds, vacuuming, and started the laundry. I then went into the living room to do what I had been wanting to do for weeks. Sew. I set my sewing machine up on the table. I laid the fabric on the floor and pinned my pattern to the top of it. As I started to cut the pieces out, I looked up just in time to see a beautiful little boy standing on the top step of my living room. My first thought was that he had come inside through the other front door. He was dirty, filthy in fact, dirt smudges on his cheeks, all over his blue overalls. His overalls were only strapped on one side, the other strap hanging loosely by his side. His shirt was a faded yellow, white check. He had the most vivid, astonishingly blue eyes I had ever seen. He looked to be about 18 months old, maybe 2 years. He had blonde hair sticking up all over the place, and it too had dirt in it. He was solid. There was no reason for me to believe he was a ghost. I laughingly asked, "Where did you come from?" He giggled again. I looked away for a few seconds while getting up off the floor. When I looked up again, he was gone. But I could still hear his giggles trailing off. I walked through the house calling for him. I checked the other doors of the house. The one in the playroom we refer to as the other front door. It was locked. I looked in the closets and under the beds all the time, calling out to him. After what seemed to be a very long time, I started checking windows to make sure there wasn't an open one. I never found the little blue-eyed boy that day, and I have not seen him since. But I will always remember exactly what he looked like. I'm not sure if he's still here. Sometimes, when the musical rocking horse in my granddaughter's playroom randomly starts playing, I imagine it's him just having a good time, playing as other children do.